Hi everybody, my name's Aly. I have a question before I start off. Who here has been disciplined or knows someone that has been disciplined in high school for violating a dress code? Wow. Okay, so that's most of us, and for perspective, there's 25 of us in this class, and there's about 5 people that did not raise their hand. To be a little bit more clear on the definition, a dress code is a set of rules that's put in place of what may or may not be worn in school. Discipline is the control that's gained by requiring the rules or orders to be obeyed and punishing the behavior that's seen as bad. For the purpose of this argument, the punishment in question is the act of removing a student from the classroom until the clothing in question is altered. These definitions are from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and this leads to my main claim, that by disciplining students for a dress code violation, public American high schools violate a student's rights. I will be supporting this with 3 secondary claims. The first being, disciplining a student based on dress is a direct violation of a student's First Amendment right by discriminating against the student for their appearance. The second is that disciplining a student based on clothes directly violates their freedom, their right to expression, which ties into the First Amendment right. Third, disciplining a student based on dress interferes with the student's right to education. Starting off with the first point, that disciplining a student based on dress is a violation of the First Amendment. I'm sure that we're all pretty familiar with the First Amendment, know the Bill of Rights pretty well, but as a refresher, the First Amendment directly quotes that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition government for redress of grievances. For a real-life example of how this ties into a student dress, I found an article written by Kyle Sumter, a high schooler in 2013, that he published in the Huffington Post. He firsthand saw the injustices of the fellow students faced about dress code violation, regardless of their reason. One example is that, in quote, in 2011, Nebraska student Elizabeth Carey wasn't allowed to wear her rosary to school because the local gangs had been wearing them, while for her, the rosary was seen as a symbol of Jesus. A second example, quote, last year Zachary Alfrahide was suspended because his long hair violated the school dress code, while he was only throwing his hair out to donate it to the foundation called Box of Love. In these cases, the school authorities directly violated the First Amendment rights that these students have. The second point is that disciplining a student based on clothes directly violates their right to expression, which is a part of the First Amendment right. In 1965, there was a Supreme Court ruling that students are allowed to wear articles of clothing representing their beliefs. In this case, the Supreme Court case is called Tinker versus Des Moines. Students were wearing black armbands and able to express their view that the Vietnam War was unjust and that they wanted a peaceful ending to it. The students were punished for wearing these black armbands, and they took the school to court. The Supreme Court ruled that in order to justify the suppression of speech, the school officials must be able to prove that the conduct in question would be materially and substantially interfere with the operation of the school. An Oxford University Department of Education expert, Dr. Richard Crane, states that offensive is not enough to determine whether clothing is oppressive to somebody. And unfortunately, this is the standards that these school officials previously cited have been using to punish these students. In other words, the term that Dr. Crane suggests that we should use is oppressive, not offensive. But unfortunately, this is not the case today. Juana Summers, an NPR reporter, found that in 2014, a Texas high school suspended more than 150 students in a single day for dress code violations. This is a little bit ludicrous, but it still happened, and she cites other examples of this in her article as well. By suspending these students, it also interferes with the students' right to education, which is a right that's outlined by the United Nations Organization for Education, Science, and Culture. The United States is part of the UN, so we are included in the blanket statement that education is a fundamental human right and essential for the exercise of other human rights. The discipline set in American high schools hinders education. Therefore, disciplining students for their dress is a direct violation of students' individual rights, including the First Amendment, and by extension, the right to expression and the right to education. In closing, I will quote the Supreme Court decision in Tinker versus Des Moines. Students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gates. Thank you.
All right, Aly, you've phrased the proposition relatively clearly. You identify it at the beginning. There's a good preview of the secondary points. I do still think there's a little bit of a problem differentiating between the first and the second point. They basically sound like the same argument to me, and if there's a distinction, it needs to be made clearer. You did, like I said, signpost those points as you got to them in the body of the speech, so it's relatively easy to follow everything that you're saying. I thought when you got to the issue of the rights that students have, the citation of the court decision was perfectly appropriate. You had good examples of cases where problems had occurred in the past, in the recent past, where these kinds of things happened. I don't know if there were ever court rulings on any of those particular cases, because if the courts have come in and defended the rights of students in those particular situations, and the schools have been punished or have forced to change their policies, then I'm not exactly sure that there's a particular problem. It's just that the policies have been ignored and the courts are protecting us. That's fine. But if the courts aren't protecting us, or if the schools, for instance, do it without regard to what the court rulings are, I think then you've got a stronger argument. And I thought that you showed some places where that would probably be the case. I think that the quote that you had that tries to distinguish the kinds of things that would be protected, oppressive rather than oppression rather than offensive. That's an interesting standard. There's not much time to develop it here, though, and it would be one of those things I think would be helped by a couple of examples. I like the fact that you finished with the quote from Tinker. I thought that you had a nice presentation for the most part, except that there's a little too much reading. Your voice is very good. I think there's good variety there, but you do have a tendency to look down a lot. All right. Thank you.